No matter the time period, social media and protests can similarly be found influencing, if not being the result of a country's culture, government, and its people. Throughout this documentary, we will see how social media and protests have started to impact some of the major events of today's generation. Oil, the backbone of all countries, superpower or not, fundamentally is a current geopolitical conflict. Before the need for oil, countries suffered from religious turmoil along with the adoption of imperialistic views by mainly Britain and France. The associated stereotype of this issue is to say that Muslim and Arabs are only seen as either oil suppliers or potential terrorists. Oil plays another key role in society. It helps in stimulating the economy. However, how could such a big force and economic stimulant leave any country in economic crisis, poverty, and unsafe living conditions? Receiving mass amounts of propaganda from the Zionist leaders, President Truman, after the Second World War, found that he should side with the, quote, Jewish Agency, the main Zionist organization against them, referring to the Arabs. This caused domestic and political complications, which further influenced the relations of the West and East today. In the following years, war was upon the Israelis. The Palestinians had their own stereotypical views on the U.S. and the Israeli, and therefore acted on it. By 1980, a Palestinian uprising was conducted called the Intifada. Young ones confronted the Israeli troops with only slingshots, and as a result, thousands were killed, including Israeli soldiers. It goes to show that both the U.S. and the Palestinians are somewhat alike, and that they will do whatever it takes to ensure the survival of its people, even if it means fueling a war or the killing of innocent victims on both sides based on some idea of differentiation. Presently, we have eliminated the idea of innocent killing. However, we still support and conduct movements toward the repression of Oriental violence in the East. In Egypt, the revolution to overthrow the Mubarak regime was inspired by another revolution over the same economical struggles we face today in America.
My government, I haven't food, I haven't anything. Me and my children, I will die today.
Thousands of people marched and rioted through the streets of Cairo, protesting against the vast unemployment rates, poverty, government corruption, and the autocratic governance the country was facing. The government responded by blocking Twitter and Facebook, as these were the means of communication between the people organizing the protests. Even though this was meant to deter the people, it did not stop them from their protest and eventually their victory over the regime.
American news coverage is influenced by a complex set of institutional relationships. These influences can be thought of as a series of filters through which the news must travel before it emerges in the voices of news anchors. To understand how American news media report on the Middle East conflict, we need to understand how these institutional filters operate. Among the most important of these filters are the business interests of the corporations that own the mass media, interests that extend beyond the United States and across the globe to the Middle East. The economic interests of media owners are shared by political elites, politicians and policymakers who form a second filter. These political elites have the power to access and influence mainstream media and are themselves part of a system dominated by corporate money and interests. The strategic importance of the Middle East to these two groups is reflected in media coverage of the region and of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A third filter, Israel's own public relations efforts, further affects the coverage. The government of Israel employs some of the largest American public relations firms as image consultants to coordinate its political and media campaigns. 9 Israeli consulates help implement these PR campaigns by developing relationships with journalists and monitoring media outlets. Scores of private American organizations, both Christian and Jewish, reiterate the official line, and organize grassroots opposition to any coverage deemed unfavorable to Israel. The most important of these is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, widely regarded as the most powerful foreign lobby in Washington. This institutional framework of American business and political interests in combination with Israeli public relations shapes media coverage of the Middle East. At the same time, those progressive organizations opposing Israeli government policy, such as Jews Against the Occupation and Americans for Peace Now, rarely make it through these filters. Finally, if any news stories critical of Israeli policy do surface, there are a host of media watchdog groups that monitor and pressure journalists and media outlets, the most important of which is CAMRA.
Through the voices of scholars, media critics, peace activists, religious figures, and Middle East experts, Peace, Propaganda, and the Promised Land carefully analyzes and explains how, through the use of language, framing, and context, Israeli colonizations of territories appear to be more of a defensive move rather than an offensive one. The documentary also explores the ways that U.S. journalists, for reasons ranging from intimidation to a lack of thorough investigation, have become complicit in carrying out Israel's PR campaign. At its core, the documentary raises questions about the ethics and role of journalism and the relationship between media and politics. In Egypt, the government's attempt to try and stop the protesters by shutting down the internet appeared a plethora of times on various news sites. By doing so, they blocked Twitter and Facebook. Blocking these social networking sites was an attempt to thwart organizers from organizing protests. However, it did not make much of a dent in their plans. Pew's Research Center's Project for Excellence in Journalism examined the online opinion of the Israeli-Arab conflict from May 19th to May 25th and found a strong support for Israel across social media. The report checked 48,000 blog posts and 430,000 posts on Facebook and Twitter. They were analyzed online in the days after President Barack Obama's speech on Israel and the Middle East. In regards to social media for Egypt, Facebook was credited for the beginning of the revolution. According to activist Wael Ghanem, the revolution started with Facebook. He is one of the main people responsible for facilitating the protests on January 25, 2012, by reaching out to Egyptian youth on Facebook. Shortly after, Ghanem was found, arrested, and imprisoned for 12 days. In an interview with CNN, Ghanem was found stating, "This revolution started online. This revolution started on Facebook." The revolution started in June 2010 when hundreds and thousands of Egyptians started collaborating content. We would post a video on Facebook that would be shared by 60,000 people on their walls within a few hours. I've always said that if you want to liberate a society, just give them the internet. How powerful is that? How powerful is it for a man to be arrested for sharing videos of thoughts of protests and people, mainly young people, executing the thoughts? After the revolution in Tunisia, the Egyptians had hope and determination that this would work out. Over a week after the president of Tunisia fled the country in response to their protests, about 90,000 Egyptians pledged their loyalty on Facebook to the Day of Rage to coincide with National Police Day. This time, the online invitation to do something resulted in actual change or progression. Social media is most certainly changing the way people take action against their government. People are now organizing new ways to make their protests more effective and for their voices to be heard. If the Egyptian revolution only lasted 18 days, how long will the next revolution last?